The exact moment an avoidant realizes you finally stopped trying is never loud. It's never dramatic. It doesn't come with a fight, a breakdown, or a final speech. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly to you, but it hits them like a sudden drop. Studies from Stanford and the University of Michigan show something most people don't know. Avoidant individuals don't register emotional loss in real time. They only recognize it after the pattern they depend on suddenly disappears. For weeks, months, maybe even years, you were the one holding the emotional thread. You texted first. You made plans. You apologized first. You held the connection together while they kept pulling away. And without realizing it, you built a rhythm the avoidant assumed would last forever. But the moment you stop reaching, the moment you stop explaining, fixing, chasing, the energy shifts. And the avoidant feels that shift long before they ever admit it. When the pattern breaks, at first, they tell themselves you're just busy. Then they tell themselves you're a little upset, maybe being dramatic. Then they assume you'll return to normal soon, because you always have. Research from the University of California shows that avoidants rely on predictable emotional patterns, even when they pretend not to need anyone. Your effort became their safety net. Your consistency became the background noise they depended on. They believed it was permanent. Avoidants build their entire life around escape routes. They keep emotional emergency exits in every relationship. When things get too close, they create distance. When intimacy deepens, they feel suffocated. But here's the secret. They only feel comfortable doing this because they assume you'll always be there. They treat your consistency like it's permanent. They treat your patience like it has no limit. They treat your effort like it's guaranteed. But then something small breaks that pattern. They open their phone expecting a message from you, and there's nothing. They check your social media expecting the usual energy, and something feels different. They go about their day, waiting for that familiar pull from you. But the pull doesn't come. This is the moment confusion hits them. Real confusion. Avoidants aren't built to understand emotional loss as it happens. They only feel it when the absence becomes undeniable. And so they start replaying old conversations in their mind. They scroll your old messages, not for nostalgia, but to look for where the ship began. They reread things they once dismissed. They wonder, did I push too far? Did I ignore too long? Did I make them feel unwanted? This confusion slowly turns into anxiety, the kind they don't know how to name. Because for the first time, the emotional space they created isn't being filled by you. It's just empty, and avoidants don't know what to do with emptiness. The internal collapse. Research from the University of Toronto shows that avoidance isn't the absence of emotion, it's the suppression of it. They distract, rationalize, detach, avoid. Those strategies work as long as someone else is carrying the emotional weight. But when you step back, those strategies collapse. Their distractions feel hollow. Their routines feel off. Their solitude suddenly feels heavier. One of the most powerful moments in this cycle is when an avoidant realizes they no longer have access to your emotional world. They can't text you to soothe their ego. They can't rely on you to fix their moods. They can't expect you to reach out when they withdraw. They can't treat you like emotional insurance. And this hits them hard because avoidants never expect to lose emotional access. When you cut that emotional cord, even if gently, they feel like a sharp snap they can't undo. They're experiencing what I call the internal breakup. Not the breakup with you, the person, but the breakup with the version of you who tried, the version who soothed their fears, stayed patient, reached out first, and kept loving them through their distance. Losing access to that version hits them far harder than they ever expected. Because avoidants never fear closeness as much as they fear losing the person who kept offering closeness. They never fear commitment as much as they fear the moment someone stops committing to them. For avoidance, emotional safety came from your effort, from your devotion, from knowing that no matter how distant they became, you would always come back. But now you don't, and that creates a feeling they're not used to handling, vulnerability. Not the soft, romantic vulnerability you hoped for, but the vulnerability that feels like losing their footing, because suddenly the dynamic they relied on is broken. And when your silence continues, something shifts inside them. They sense that your energy isn't centered around them anymore. They notice you aren't emotionally orbiting them. And that realization creates a panic they can't rationalize away. The test. Avoidants build emotional escape routes in every relationship. They keep distance, so they never have to feel abandoned. But the irony is this. The distance they create becomes the very thing that leads to the abandonment they feared. When you finally detach, they feel a loss of control, Not control over you, but control over predictable dynamic they depended on. This is when they start testing the waters. A random, hey, a vague comment, a small breadcrumb message. Not to reconnect, but to check if they still have access to your emotional world. Because access was their comfort. Your effort was their reassurance. Your presence was their emotional safety net. But your response now? Calm, neutral, unattached, not cold, just no longer fueled by old hopes. And that neutrality tells them the truth more loudly than any argument ever could. You're not running back. You're not waiting. You're not emotionally available in the same way anymore. The shock of your movement. That's when the shock hits. The shock of seeing you actually move on. The shock of seeing you lighter, calmer, more grounded. The shock of realizing your silence wasn't punishment. It was healing. And the shock of understanding that the version of you they depended on doesn't exist anymore. Avoidant sense energetic shifts more than verbal ones. And the shift in you cuts through every defense they've built. They start feeling the same things you felt for so long. The longing, the confusion, the fear, the regret. Not all at once. Avoidants don't process emotion that directly. They feel it in delayed waves. Research from UCLA shows that people with avoidant tendencies experience regret later than others because they suppress emotional signals until they become overwhelming. So while you're beginning to heal, they're beginning to understand. While you're finding clarity, they're drowning in realization. While you're rediscovering yourself, they're losing the version of you who once fought for them. The truth they can't avoid. And here comes the truth they can't avoid anymore. You weren't asking for too much. You were offering what they didn't know how to receive. They finally see that you weren't clingy. You were committed. You weren't emotional. You were expressive. You weren't demanding. You were consistent. You weren't fragile. You were patient. After confusion fades, something else rises. Curiosity. The avoidant wants to know why you stopped. They replay conversations. They reread your messages. This is when they realize you weren't asking for the impossible. You were asking for the bare minimum. Presence, affection, partnership. And because you no longer ask, they finally see the value of what they rejected. And the moment they pushed too far was the moment you learned to choose yourself. That choice changed everything. Because people think avoidants fear love. But they don't. Avoidants fear what love requires. Responsibility, consistency, openness, presence. Showing up even when it feels uncomfortable. You didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you finally learned to care for yourself. Your silence is not punishment. It is protection. Your distance is not revenge. It is recovery. Your absence is not abandonment. It is self-respect. The awakening. And here's the part most people never realize. When avoidant finally understands that you stopped trying, it is not your loss. It is their awakening. You were not the problem. You were the mirror. You showed them what connection could feel like. You showed them what safety could look like. You showed them what emotional presence truly is. And when you stepped away, that mirror disappeared. They're left with themselves, their patterns, their fears, their unhealed parts. And they finally see that the thing they pushed away was the very thing they needed. But by the time that wave hits them, you've already begun transforming. You're stronger, clearer, wiser, rooted in your worth in a way you weren't before. In the end, the moment an avoidant realizes you finally stopped trying is a moment they finally feel what you felt all along. The longing, the confusion, the fear, the regret. But by then, you're different. You're no longer willing to shrink yourself for someone who wasn't ready to grow. You've outgrown the version of you who accepted emotional scraps. The power of this moment isn't that they finally realize what you were worth. It's that you finally do. That's the power of walking away. Not to hurt them, but to save yourself. And that is the moment everything changes.